You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am Pete Fletzer, one of your hosts, and along with my co-host Nick Mielke, we are ready to take you on a journey to meet the incredible people behind the Star Wars fandom. Now, typically, we dive deep into an hour-long conversation with the masterminds shaping our beloved universe, but every Thursday, well, we shake things up a little bit with our live show on YouTube called ATGLive, featuring a special segment that we call Force Connect, where we bring in friends from around the Star Wars galaxy to join us live. In these bite-sized 20 to 25-minute chats, we uncover the adventures and insights of our fellow travelers through the stars, exploring the endless wonders of that galaxy far, far away. And this week, get ready for something special. Today, we are thrilled to have Brandon Wainerdi, the creative powerhouse behind Talking Bay 94, joining us. You've probably also seen his work on StarWars.com and Star Wars Insider, where his passion for the saga shines brighter than a lightsaber. Brandon's journey through the Star Wars tapestry is absolutely incredible, and trust me, folks, you are in for a ride. From some cherished memories to some untold tales that'll awaken the Force within you, this interview is bound to leave you wanting more. So, whether you're a seasoned Jedi or just starting your adventure, grab a glass of blue milk, find your comfy spot, and get ready to be transported to a realm where the Force flows freely. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned in to the Around the Galaxy podcast for more thrilling tales from the stars. Now, let's dive into where you can connect to us, and you can go to our website, the sswnetwork.com. You can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the SSW Network. You can also follow us on Twitter at ATGcast. Easy for me to say. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the SSW Network, and leave us a voicemail at 504-321-1501, 504-321-1501. Make sure to join us so we can explore the galaxy together. And now, our conversation with Brandon Wainerdi. Brandon.
Hello.
Hello there. How's it going?
Hello there. How's it going, guys?
Okay, am I right?
You are right.
Okay, I thought so.
Right.
I thought so.
You got it right.
Okay.
And if you weren't, I wasn't going to say, I was going to be like, that would have been a good.
That's one of those ones you just take it.
Yeah. For sure. Great to be here, but yes.
Awesome. Good to see you, man.
Yeah.
We've had you on Around the Galaxy. We've had you on Podcast The Wills. We've had you on a couple different things. And now we're dragging you into our new adventure here on ATGLive. But for those that may not know you, Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's the Brandon Wainerdi story?
Oh, I don't know. What is the story? I'm just a huge special features dork, which I'm sure you'll. And so I have a podcast, Talking Bay 94, where I interview cast and crew of Star Wars, and then I write for Star Wars Insider, where I do the same thing, and StarWars.com. And then I worked on a Star Wars encyclopedia coming out this fall. So just a bunch of stuff. But that's me. That's all I got.
I love that. And we've talked a bunch, both online, both offline, on shows, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, behind the scenes. There's so many ways our paths overlap. And one of the things I love about your show, and I listen to it every time you drop an episode, you really do focus in on, those creators, whether it's a writer, a special effects person. Like, you've been able to have so many neat conversations, things that definitely point directly to behind the scenes, featurettes, that kind of stuff. So the question is, like us, you're big into behind the scenes, classic filmmaking, that kind of thing. Do you have a favorite, especially if it relates to like original trilogy, behind the scenes story, moment, somebody you talk to that just stands out as one of your highlights?
Dang, I'm trying to think of my favorite behind the scenes stories, and a lot of them do come from the original ILM from 1977, when they did not know what was going on, and they were, they weren't bad at their jobs. They were making history, but they were all just a bunch of hippies, right? And that were just causing headaches for the studio, which I think is so funny looking back on it now. And now all of those people are, heads of their own companies or studios and have won how many Academy Awards. And there's all the stories of the hot tubs or the water slides or the execs coming over.
Light and Magic gave us so many gifts.
And so
talking about all of that.
Those are always the ones I gravitate back to. And I'm lucky to have talked to a lot of those people, and I pretend that I don't know the story. And if they lead into that story, I'll just sit there and listen intently, because those are my favorite.
That's really cool. And you mentioned it, and yeah, these creators have come through and gone on to become, the superstars in the industry. And remarkable the way Lucasfilm, Industrial Light and Magic built the industry, not just for Star Wars, but I love the Light and Magic video, the documentary, and I love the connection to Star Trek. Like, to me, that's like that was the gap, right? That was the connector there at that point. But it's interesting. You have interviewed how many episodes of Talking Bay do you have?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'll just
well, you've got
like 160.
Okay, we'll call it 160. Okay, good, which is great. But so, of your heroes, and you've spoken to a lot of them, you've had a lot of great guests. What do you think it is about? And I look, my first interview ever for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, I've said this before, was Ben Burt. I spoke to Ben Burt at an IMAX opening for the special effects movie that he did. What is it about these Star Wars creators, both the OG ones and the new ones, because the new ones are as accessible, if you will, sort of. What is it about them, you think, that makes them so excited and or willing to talk to fans and talk to, people like yourself?
I think about that a lot, because I also think in my own shoes, right? If someone came to me and was like, I'd like to interview you for something you did at work even 10 years ago, I don't care. I don't remember. Right. It is very interesting to think about how it's been mythologized. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think part of it does come from a sense of making sure their story is told correctly. Right. There's a lot of, not fake stories is the wrong word, but there's a lot of, again, mythologizing and legendary things that have happened that might not be exactly true. But I think that they're still willing to talk through it. But I think now, again, I'm, 40 years removed from when the movies have come out, and I was not alive. And so I have to kind of take a different lens. And it was something I learned early on, and maybe y'all can relate, but I try not to ask those leading questions anymore.
Yeah.
And try to just kind of approach it from a sense of inspiration or a sense of what got them into the industry that they are in. And that has kind of led the conversation down a much more, I think, both creatively inspiring life for me and a path for me, but also I think lends itself to kind of getting to the real heart of who these people are and figuring out what makes them all in common, right? What is the line beyond them just working on Star Wars in some capacity? What makes them the same kind of creative?
I think that's why I love Talking Bay 94, and why, as Nick said, we catch them every single time. Is there's a million Star Wars podcasts. They're like, remember that time when Luke did that thing or whatever? And there's nothing wrong with that, because there's a lot of really interesting lore conversation, tons of great lore conversations. But what makes your show so unique is that, and what we try to do with Around the Galaxy is kind of like get to know why and what. When you did some of your earlier interviews, let me ask it this way. Similar to the question of what's some of your favorite stories. Who is the guest that you got that just blew your mind and had stories, not big names necessarily, unless it was a big name, but that had stories that changed the way you looked at Star Wars and, or, that whole behind the scenes world that you live in?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think of who has changed how I think about Star Wars. It goes, I think I always talk about my interview with Tim Zahn, because I was very early on in the podcast, and I was at Comic-Con. I kind of threw a Hail Mary to Del Rey, and I was able to interview him backstage and talk through kind of how he puts together stories and what he thinks is important for Star Wars. In a similar vein, there's a man named Bill Slavicsek who is kind of the originator of all the West End Games source books, and he is maybe the most unsung hero in current Star Wars in terms of what he invented he set the groundwork for then the Zahn trilogy and everything. That's what they use as their Bible, right? Of like,
Right.
here are the creatures you can use. Here are the kind of story beats that we think are correct. And he is just a guy, and he was very passionate, and he had game experience, and he had a very distinct idea of what it takes to tell a good story. And by talking with him, it really unlocked probably 20 years worth of Star Wars storytelling for me, and really kind of inspired me to. That's why I just amassed the West End Games books, because I think that even now you can go to those. I think Andor is a great example where it's pretty much just running as a West End Games campaign at this point. It's really I go back to him a lot, and he has a great book that came out about his time too that I recommend.
I'm all but certain the very first episode of Talking Bay 94 I ever listened to was that Tim Zahn episode, and it stood out to me because that was early, certainly in my podcasting journey, Star Wars, all that stuff, growing up as a, kid from the 80s who grew up on those books, that kind of stuff. I remember specifically you asking him, what are the other stories you want to write? Mm-hmm. And one of them was about, Boba Fett trying to get Han back across the galaxy to Jabba Hutt. The other one was about Obi-Wan sneaking across the galaxy to fake his death in order to disappear after, the events of everything that happened. So that episode is like, my origin story with Talking Bay 94 for sure. But you had another episode, and I'm not going to remember the name, and I hate that I don't, because but it was so good. You interviewed somebody whose parents also worked in movies and set design, and they talked about running around on the James Bond sets at Pinewood as a kid. I can't remember who that was, but it was so just, again, that's that stuff that sucks me. And I'm like, people grew up, right. Pinewood Studios, and you lived in England, and like that was normal. Like my dad built wooden whatever the hell for Star Wars or James Bond or whatever. Like those connecting stories are the things that just reel me in. And you've had so many of those conversations.
Yeah, I really don't take it for granted. It is, again, like I'm looking at my list right now, just like the episodes, and it's I don't know how many years, it's 6 years, 5 years I've been doing this, and it is, who knows how long I do it, but when I stop, I'll have this kind of like very, very important thing for me in terms of the creative people I've been able to talk to, but also I hope there's a small aspect of it that is evergreen, that people can constantly kind of refer back to it for whoever this might be, because some of these people, a lot of these people have been interviewed a bunch of times, and some of these people have been interviewed, a couple times. And so it is kind of creating some amount of oral history around Star Wars, especially for these newer movies that maybe didn't get the big Rinsler making of books, right? We just had the Incredible Show stack books, but there are some holes there that I think are interesting to fill as time goes on. And like we were saying, as there's a lot of mythologizing and a lot of question marks and theories, and it's better to just go straight to the source. And I'm very proud to sometimes be that source or kind of 100% people. So
yeah. And you were the catalyst for me. I think it was last week, tweeting about and thus pushing me to watch RoboDoc. First of all, holy crap. RoboDoc is so good. And of course we get Phil Tippett in RoboDoc. And I saw something today. They're looking for animators because they're going to do RoboCop 2. They're going to do another season. Like it's going to be a whole thing. Okay. So that's fun. And of course I love Phil Tippett. He's at the top of the list of people I'd love to talk to. And, so much of his story that he told in Light and Magic, talks about the personal connections, not only the personal struggles, but, what he went through doing that kind of stuff. I do want to transition us a little bit because while you do write about these amazing behind the scenes things, you also are writing for Star Wars Magazine, StarWars.com, Insider, StarWars.com. We have so much stuff coming our way. And one of the interesting things lately is it feels like Lucasfilm is willing to step up a little bit more and shut down crazy rumors about, the movie's going to be called this, or I'm not asking you to reveal inside secrets. I don't know all the conversations you get to have with Lucasfilm and those kind of folks. But from your opinion, as a Star Wars fan, what does it say to you that Star Wars is engaging at least a little bit more on some of these more crazy, outlandish rumors? The movie's going to be called this. The whatever. What does that say for the future of Star Wars and kind of where we are now? Because obviously it's been a rocky road.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's been a thing for Star Wars. I mean, since the beginning, right? You have Dave Prowse going out and saying, here's what's going to happen in Star Wars, or here's not what's going to happen in Empire Strikes Back, right? And then you think about when I was going through my internet days, it was Super Snipe. I don't know if y'all remember. Or Super Shadow.
Super Shadow.
Super Shadow.
And again, it was like, it's not real, and it's fictional, but you do kind of it becomes part of the conversation. It becomes part of how you're viewing Star Wars, and I do think that it's important as Star Wars grows and grows and reaches more and more people, that you shut down as much as possible. So I think they're realizing. I think on the flip side, a huge shout out to the Star Wars social and digital team, because I think what they're doing in terms of outreach with fans right now is a big thing that has been missing in a sense, but also I think is really kind of cultivating this next generation of fans in a way that makes Star Wars feel important and personable. And that's, I think, even more important than shutting down anything. It's kind of being part of a community and fostering a community. And I think that more than anything is kind of a great bright beacon for the future.
It's interesting because you're right about that. And I think there is, I've worked in social media outside of the Star Wars world. And it's interesting because Star Wars as a community is very strong. I mean, look, how many freaking podcasts are there, right? You can't, I'm always surprised when somebody tells me about a podcast that's great that I've never heard of. And I'm like, oh my God, how have I been missing that one? I'll tell you how, because there's too many of them. There's so many of them. How do we keep up? But, it is interesting because living in the social media world like we do, we feel like there was a comedian, and I can't remember his name. It's going to kill me, and I should just look it up because I reference it often. But he at one point said, the thing is with social media is people forget that we're famous, right? And what he means by that is, like, if I shout out somebody, I mean, how often do we shout out just in general, just a comment? The best I think is Paul Sun-Hyung Lee. Right. The guy is like, when people have something positive to say about Star Wars and something he's done, he's there. He doesn't care if you have 2 followers or 1 million followers. He's engaging. And so you're right. I think that social media.
And he has a clip from Kim's Convenience for every single thing anyone says.
It is remarkable. It is remarkable. But I think you're right. I think the social media space right now, it kind of, you expect to have some sort of engagement, or at least somebody who's kind of speaking your language. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to also kind of figure out what that language is, right?
Yeah.
And what does that sound like on the different platforms and for the different people? Because again, Star Wars is so varied, right?
Yep.
It's not just one kind of thing. It's not just one kind of movie or one kind of book. And so it is very important to kind of, like we say, Star Wars is for everyone. And that's a great t-shirt and a great idea. But how do you actually, in terms of brand building or in terms of putting it down on paper, it is an incredibly tough challenge. And the marketing is I think, the strongest it's been in a very, very, very long time.
Yep. And I would like to say it was a response to the negativity, but I think they would do it anyway. And I think, and here's the funny thing, and tell me if you agree with this statement, the negativity is a lot more visual or apparent to the 3 of us on the screen right now because of what we do. I think the average fan doesn't see all the BS. And when they get a StarWars.com on Twitter clicking like to something they said, it's a huge deal. It is a huge deal. So we're going a long way. Talking Bay 94 has been, right? You're kind of, I hate to say this to you, man, but you're kind of one of the OG Star Wars podcasts. And I know you're not a day over 22 years old, so it's impossible that you've been doing it for this long. But it is one of the longer lasting shows. So first of all, tell us, you were referencing before, and I think you're 100% right. And it's kind of the mindset that we try to take too when we talk to our guests and from different spots in the creator spaces. Like, it's almost a documentation of them at that moment, right? So what inspired you to start Talking Bay 94, and what do you attribute the longevity to?
I started Talking Bay 94. It was right after Last Jedi, and I was like hyped on Last Jedi, and all I wanted to do was just hear more Star Wars. I just wanted to like kind of be a part of the conversation. And I had been, growing up, I was going to celebrations. There was a Star Wars Fan Days was in Plano, Texas, where I grew up, and that was what it was started by Official Picks, which also ran Star Wars Celebration, so like it was enormous.
Hmm.
And so I was very lucky to kind of have that behind the scenes knowledge and special features. And so then, I went to college and I stopped going on the StarWars.com message boards as often, and I stopped going to the Force.net every day. And it was also kind of during a darker time in Star Wars, where it was the M&Ms and the NASCAR and the Rose Bowl parade, right? It was that kind of Star Wars, which I still have a great kind of memory of that. But the final kind of part of that is the Clone Wars, right? The Clone Wars was kind of the thing going during that time.
Yep.
And so by the time then Last Jedi came out, I was kind of really full back in with Star Wars. And I was like, what did I miss? Where is the conversation happening now? And I heard about Blast Points because there was an article on AV Club, I want to say, that was like the Star Wars podcast dedicated to minutia or something. And I was like, this sounds like the Star Wars podcast for me. And I listened to probably, I want to say 30 or 40 episodes of Blast Points between like that December, 15th to like the end of the year. And the beginning of the year started and I was back home and I texted my buddy who I was running a website with, who's my producer, Jason. And I was like, I want to start a Star Wars podcast. And we just kind of, I threw out some ideas. I listened to a lot of Mark Maron and at the time Nerdist with Chris Hardwick. And I was like, this doesn't exist. This one-on-one Star Wars conversation does not exist. And I kind of just ran with it. And I was very lucky early on to have some great guests who introduced me to other great guests. The late Gerald Home, it connected me with like pretty much every Jabba's Palace person. So I'm forever indebted to him. And then it's kind of just gone from there. And there's part of it that it being so long lived, quote unquote, like you said, is a little what's the word? It's not completely correct because I was doing a weekly cadence for a while.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I take a few months off, and then sometimes it becomes a monthly cadence. And I think now it's kind of like whenever I have an opportunity or there's a guest or someone reaches out, then that's kind of where I'm at currently. But I've taken it as, if I'm enjoying it, let me keep going and let me do it as it happens. And that's also been a huge weight off my shoulders recently.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's part of it too. I think for a lot of us in the creator space, Star Wars can feel like a job. And that I feel, and there was part of me that was kind of getting burned out. I was watching it just to like talk about it or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And so being able to take a step back and also kind of diving in a little bit more into the professional fan capacity of it all has been very interesting for me and very fulfilling in a different way. And that's also given me an opportunity to kind of, again, take a step back. And again, if there's an interview with Ben Burt I do for StarWars.com, in my mind, that replaces a Talking Bay interview with Ben Burt.
Yep.
That would be great. It's like, oh, that was kind of satiated, right? Or if I'm able to interview Ian McCaig for Star Wars Insider, then that kind of satiates it in my mind as a Talking Bay. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, I'm able to kind of expand what I'm doing, what I'm interviewing, how I'm writing. And that's been, all to be said, a really positive thing for me. And I'm very grateful that people keep reading or listening or whatever it might be. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I think you lean into something really important, and that Pete and I have talked about. I started Podcast the Wheels in 2017 after I went to Celebration in Orlando. I think Pete, you started in 18 for Around the Galaxy, 18 or 19.
19, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we're right there in that same range. And we've been through some ups and downs. When pandemic hit and I was at home all the time, like every single Sunday night. You were on one of those episodes, Brent. Like It became, all these things. So like you said, you get into that rhythm or that cadence of like, I have to have something every single week. But there's a difference in like, is the push I have to have a show out right now? Or is the push like I have a story to tell and have a conversation to have? And that's where I know that when Pete and I kind of teamed up and said, hey, let's do this together with Around the Galaxy, like that's the thing. Like we may not have a brand new guest, brand new episode every single week, but it's quantity. I mean, it's quality over quantity at this point. Like let's tell the story, let's talk. Because the other thing that you said that we really relate to is when the strikes hit, we didn't cover, Andor, we didn't cover, Ahsoka or whatever. I guess Ahsoka was out.
It was Ahsoka.
We didn't cover that because we wanted to stand in solidarity with our friends that were working in those areas. But it actually allowed me to enjoy it more than I have recent other shows that came out, because I watched other shows going, how am I going to talk about this on the show? How am I going to make this into a thing. And I hear a lot of that same thing coming from you, which is we're still fans at our heart and at our core, but we also get to, talk about it, whether it's for Insider or .com or ATG or SSW, whatever it is we're doing. It's neat that we're able to kind of evolve along with it and still find the joy, because I think that's what hopefully we're still sharing out to the people that are tuning into what we do.
For sure.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. And I hope people who may not have listened, who for whatever reason, to Talking Made 94 are going to go and check it out. If you haven't, where have you been? Gosh, it's the OG. You're missing out. But for those that are now like, I got to find it, tell us about the best place to find you and to find the show.
Yeah, you can find me at actually Brandon, which is pretty much anything that's not Star Wars. And then Talking Made 94 on every social platform, and talkingmade94.com is where you can find all the episodes and transcripts and stuff, a bunch of stuff. So yeah,
and then, keep your eyes peeled for that encyclopedia that's coming out.
Yeah,
my curiosity is peaked. When is that? Can you give us any detail?
It's October. I think it just got pushed a little bit. It was September. Now it's October. It's through DK. A lot of great people have worked on it. Amy Rakow, who else? Dan Zaire, Kelly Knox, Dan Brooks, Megan Krause. I want to say a lot of people, and so it's been a lot. It was a fun. We did it over the summer, really, and big spreadsheets, and it was a good time. So I'm excited for people to read it and check it out, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it soon.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes out, we'll have to have you back on so we can talk in some detail about that. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to Brandon Wainerdi, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. Head on over to our website, the SSW Network, to find out how to keep up with us, find links to our merch, and become a patron. The show has been copyright 2024, Pete in the Seat Studios, and our music is brought to us by the band Apollo's Ghost.